Hey everybody, Greg Pruitt here with Idaho Dispatch, and I am joined today by Branden Durst. How are you?
Doing well, Greg. How are you?
It's hot.
Very.
It's hot in the Boise area. So, um, you are running for State Superintendent of Education,
Yes,
correct?
correct.
Yeah,
Yep.
one of just a handful of statewide offices, and you are running for the Republican nomination, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So, what got you to that point? I mean, and I ask a lot of these statewide officers, especially, you're going to represent the entire state in that position, both
Yeah.
Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Constitution Party, whatever it is,
Yep.
everybody, you represent them in that capacity statewide. So, was there a tipping point or a certain story that ultimately you said, I have to run and here's why?
I'm not sure if there was necessarily a tipping point, but certainly the pandemic and the way that school closures were dealt with during the pandemic had a huge influence on me. Just seeing the way this, not just on my own children, but also other people's children were struggling, to be able to get through the school year, and you hear just the unwillingness by the state board or the State Department of Ed to lead on those issues and to try to get schools to open up. That was really frustration for me. So um, that, and along with a combination of other factors that were happening, I just kind of felt like I was waiting for someone to take the torch and lead on those issues, and nobody was. And I figured with my background, it was time for me to step forward and try to do something about it.
Okay. Let's talk about your background. What was your what is your background in education,
Sure.
and what makes you uniquely qualified for this position?
So I served in the state legislature. I was elected to the House twice and also the Senate. Served on the Education Committee. I was a co-creator of the Advanced Opportunities Program, which is one of the most successful programs we've had in Idaho education. Really proud of that experience. I also have been a curriculum developer and instructor at the community college level, and have small business owner, all sorts of different things, but have a lot of professional background that's in various areas, which I think will be really useful for somebody that serves in the position of the State Department of Education as state superintendent, because that position, unlike what a lot of people think, they think, oh, you're the head teacher. You're really not the head teacher in that role. You're really leading a policy and management position. And given my background, I think that will be a good fit.
Okay. Well, what would you say to people that say, you're not a teacher, right? You've never been a teacher, or you didn't get the right degree or whatever. I mean, what do you say to those people?
Well, I'll have my education specialist degree, which is basically the pinnacle of what we would look for in that position. Anyway, I'll have that prior to the primary. But um, in terms of not having been a credentialed K-12 teacher, for example, again, that goes back to what the job actually is. And if you look at the statutory requirements for the role of state superintendent, it's a much more policy-driven, management-driven role. And so understanding how state government works is much more important than I think most people understand. And so, a lot of people don't get that, not only is the state superintendent in charge of, leading the Department of Education, they're also in charge of sitting on the State Board of Ed, which has a lot of, has all the policy implications for our schools, including like things like critical race theory and Common Core and things like that. And you also sit on the State Land Board, so having a real broad understanding as to how state government works is vitally important. And if you just come from this from a singular perspective, whether it be a classroom teacher or a school board member or something like that, you really aren't going to get a good grasp of what's going on in state government to be able to effectively administer that position.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about policy, and what do you believe maybe are some of your top priorities as the state superintendent of education? What would you like to see changed, added to what we're doing, subtracted from what we're doing?
Yeah. So there's three primary things I'd like to do. And I have a lot of ideas. I'm an ideas guy, but the three things that I'm really focused on are, first, ending Common Core. It's a promise that we've made to the people of Idaho. It's something that a lot of parents feel strongly about. As a parent, I feel strongly about it too. The second thing is stopping critical race theory. Unfortunately, the State Board of Education is going in the opposite direction of that, but I think it's really critical that we stop critical race theory right now, and that's one of my first jobs as a state superintendent will be. And the third thing would be to have money follow students in the form of an education savings account, and I think we can do that. I think it's important that we give expanded school choice, and we have real school choice in the form of providing resources to parents, because it's one thing to say, sure, you have an opportunity, but to not actually use them is a different issue altogether.
Okay. And for those listening in, we got little Durst here.
Yeah, you're when you
He's
have
enjoying us.
when you have a parent of five, you can't always find daycare for all the kids at the same time. So it comes with the territory being a dad.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the critical race theory. That's a discussion happening nationwide.
Yeah.
We've got groups here in Idaho, like the Idaho Freedom Foundation. They've been talking about it.
Yeah.
Bills were introduced and passed this last legislative session.
Yep.
What do you say to people on the other side of this discussion that say it's not happening here in Idaho? It's not a big deal. Show us the examples. What do you say to those individuals?
Well, for one, we have examples, right? I mean, I spoke at the last indoctrination task force and provide examples. And currently in Idaho administrative rules, we have an example of an organization called WIDA that we rely upon for our ELL standards, and that's an organization that fully promotes critical race theory and other kind of leftist perspectives. And so we know that they exist. We pay them $610,000 every single year, and that's one example. But even if we didn't have those examples, which there are many, even if we didn't have those examples, the question is that something we want invading our state? And the answer to that question for me is no. And we should do whatever we can to stop it from happening. And if it exists already, we need to eradicate it, but then we need to create a bulwark to prevent it from continuing to spread here. I just don't understand the perspective that says, well, if it's not happening, we don't have to worry about it. Well, yeah, but if you live in a termite infected area, you're not going to wait till the termites get into your house before you start spraying. You're going to stop them before they get in. And that's what I see critical race theory as an example of those termites that are invading our house and really causing it to have a questionable structural foundation.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about funding. Education funding is always a major topic every legislative session. And you'll see commercials. You'll hear a lot of people talk about the Idaho is ranked last or close to last, and how much we spend per kid on education. And so the call a lot of the time is to increase that amount of money that we're spending on education. So what do you believe as far as education funding? How to fund it? Do we need more money? Do we need less money? Is it right where it is, or how to?
Yeah, so that's a really big question. Let me kind of break it out in a couple different ways. The first is, does Idaho spend enough money on education? Well, the question is, what do we want out of our education system? We know that spending more money on education doesn't result in better outcomes. How do we know that? Well, we know that because if we look at places like the District of Columbia, who we're often compared against with that 50, when we're in 51st place, they spend $30,000-$40,000 per pupil, and they still aren't getting results. So money doesn't equate student achievement. That's the first thing. We need to get rid of that myth, because it doesn't. But we also know that there are places where targeted investment in education can be helpful. But to me, the most important piece is to be able to help parents make those decisions on how that money should be spent, because parents know best. Have the most, they're most invested in the outcome of their child. So what that looks like to me is, first, having money follow students, making sure that the money that we do appropriate can go to a school whatever school that child, whatever that school that parent wants that child to attend. That's number. Look at the way that we appropriate funds in Idaho and just acknowledge that there's a lot of inequity within that. And so a lot of folks don't know this. They assume that when the money is appropriated from Idaho, from the state legislature, that every student in the state gets the same amount from that state appropriation. And that's just not true. I mean, for example, in the Treasure Valley, there's huge disparities. This is Boise School District, which is already one of the most wealthy districts in the state. It's on average $2,500 to $3,000 more per pupil from the state than other districts in Ada and Canyon counties. So tell me why, just because you live on the wrong side of Eagle Road, for example, or Cloverdale Road, should you get more or less money? These are the kids living in the same general communities, but they're treated very differently from the funding standpoint. And so I think that's a problem. And so I drafted a bill, House Bill 62, which Representative graciously offered to have printed for me last legislative session. It's the Empower Parents in Education Act. And I wrote that bill in concert with some other groups to be able to figure out ways that we could make our education system and our funding system of that education system more equitable, and make sure that we're not, having these winners and losers. we also recognize that rural school districts, small school districts, those that we define as less than 2,000 students, have a different situation, right? And so we make sure that they never lose money on a per pupil basis. But larger districts should be getting about the same amount per kid and being able to do what they need to do with it. So there's some big issues. Should we spend more money? I don't know. I think we need to look at how we're actually currently spending the money that we have and kind of reshuffle that a little bit so we're having more equity, and then we can see what would happen next.
Okay. Is there any other big major policy platforms that you have going into being in that job?
Yeah, so I mean, besides those top three, which I think are really my primary focus, there's other things I'd like to do. For example, I'd like to be able to really embrace career technical education. Oftentimes people my age and your age, Greg, we were told, college or nothing, right? That was the trumpet. And that's been a sustained anthem that we've seen in education for at least last 2 decades. And I think that's wrong. I think we need to tell kids it's okay to go into trades. And in fact, that's something they should be aspired to do. That's not a second option. That's not a contingency plan. That's a primary objective that a lot of kids should have, and those are great. And so I am proposing that we create a high school diploma that's a CTE diploma. We have a CTE endorsement now, which just passed last session. But what I'm arguing for is a CTE diploma, which has different high school graduation requirements. And those graduation requirements are tailored to the student to be able to get what they need so they can be successful in the trade or whatever career program that they're looking to go into. It's about being more responsive to students. I think we also need to look at, our retention programs for our faculty. We see huge changes, or huge variations between how successful school districts are at being able to retain staff. I think we need to do that. And part of that goes to what my bill actually does, which is really cuts all the strings for how districts can spend money so they can choose to do those things in a more meaningful way. The local trustees know what money they need, and they know what programs they need to be able to support. I think they should have the ability to say, when they get their lump sum from the state of Idaho, to say, we're going to break it out in this way or this way, and then spend it in ways that make more sense to their local community.
Okay. All right, so we had to bring in little Durst. He was not happy.
He likes being with Dad, though, so that's good.
Absolutely. All right, so last segment here, and we kind of talk about things that maybe people will bring up from either citizens or other candidates or whatever. Mm-hmm. You talked about your time as a legislator. Okay, mm-hmm. At that time you were a Democrat.
I was.
You were a Democrat.
Yep.
Can you talk about what do you say to people who go, hey, wait a minute here, you were a Democrat, now you're just running as a Republican because you want a better chance at winning.
Yeah.
And so maybe if you could tell people, maybe talk about your transition from being a Democrat to now running as a Republican.
Yeah, it's a good question. So first of all, people should know that when I was a Democrat, I voted more Republican than a lot of Republicans did. My voting record was incredibly conservative. I had 100% pro-life voting record. I voted against Obamacare. I was the only Democrat to do that. So I've had lots of opportunities to take the easy way out from a political standpoint, and I never have. And so this is really not any different. So I think those that would say, well, you're just trying to do this because it's easier, just don't understand my background, because I've never done that before. This is an issue of conviction for me. President Trump led the way for folks like me to walk away from the Democratic Party, which has found itself hurling faster and faster towards a leftward abyss. And as a person of faith, I just couldn't continue to be a part of it. Like I said, my voting record has always been very conservative. The last session I had, I was the 8th most conservative senator. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal now because the Senate's not particularly conservative relative to how it was before. But just as a point of reference, I was right behind Russ Fulcher in the rankings for that from the Freedom Foundation. So I stand by my record. I've been pretty conservative all along. The Republican Party is just a better fit for me, and it probably has been all along. But you grow up in a family that believes one thing or another, and you try to make your family happy. But I'm committed to the Republican brand, and I want to continue to fight for the things that I believe are important for Republicans. Constitutional principles, limited government, parental rights, those sorts of things. And I think in education in particular, we're seeing right now just a cavalcade of situations that dictate that we really need strong Republican leadership. We need somebody that's willing to, buck the trend. And look, people can say a lot of things about me, but keeping the boat from rocking is not one of those things they would say for me. I mean, I'm happy to go in and mix things up, which is I think what we need to do in our education system right now. So,
Okay. Were you in the Senate when Common Core was voted on?
so they had approved it the session after that, and I was on record in Senate Education Committee for being opposed to Common Core from the beginning. You can look back in the archives; it's right there in black and white on the minutes. I've never supported Common Core because I always thought it was a bad idea, and it's some folks that have changed their mind about that decided to support it. They have their reasons, but I've continued to be opposed to it. I thought it was always a bad idea because I thought it was a way to, not only data privacy issues that come with it, but also just issues around how it impacts parents and their ability to educate their kids. So, as a dad, that's something I care a lot about, and it's something I've always felt that we needed to do something about. And so it's a consistent position that I've had. I don't change my views to try to get votes. I just hold the positions that I have, and if they line up where they line up. So,
Okay. All right. The last thing we typically do with candidates is you can look at the camera, address the voters,
sure.
and do your campaign pitch, and you can tell them where to go on your website and everything.
Sure.
So with that, go ahead.
Well, thanks, Greg, for the opportunity to talk. Sorry, little guy needed some attention today, so that is what it is when you're a dad. But sure, if you want to learn more about my campaign, you can visit my campaign website, durstforidaho.com. That's durstforidaho.com. You can call me directly. Campaign phone number is 208-505-8893. We care about three things we're laser focused on: ending Common Core, stopping critical race theory, and having money follow students. We believe those three things are key to having a more constitutional, more liberty-minded perspective on how we run our education system, in a way to really empower parents to be able to get more actively involved in their kids' education. Because really, that's what this is about to me, Greg, is having parents be able to be a part of their kids' education, giving them the tools and resources they need in a really meaningful way to make decisions. Because giving lip service to things isn't going to get a job done. We need to finally step up and put our money where our mouth is, and I think that's what I'd like to do as state superintendent.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you
both letting us interview today.
Thank you.